So what we're going to try to facilitate, and this would be obviously when I run or when we run our meetings locally or when I run a roundtable at a church, we're normally not in a U shape facing an audience. But what we're going to try to do in the next however long we have is I want to present a couple cases. They're vague on purpose just to kind of highlight some of the expertise that we have on the stage, just so you can see how a team might interact and bring different aspects of ministry, service to the table. I told you I most recently did this in a church up north, and we had a very similar dynamic. We didn't have police officers, which I wish we had at that point, but the actual response team for their church was a group about this size, maybe a little bigger, and we were able to discuss actual cases. And now in order to do that, you're going to have permission from the individuals involved and so on, and there's some legalities to that. But the aspect of having a multidisciplinary task force, even in your local church and in your community, is essential to doing proper ministry, I would think. It actually enhances your ability to minister if you can hear different perspectives. So that's why we've structured it the way we have. So the purpose is to highlight different areas of expertise and also let you see how a discussion may go. Here's the first case study. It's incredibly vague, but it's based on a real case. Karen, who's been separated from her husband with our blessing, that's the church's blessing, contacted Joy last night in an anxious state. "I'm sure he was in the house again today while I was at work," she said. "I don't want to be ugly, but he agreed to give us the space we requested. I hate to accuse him because I really don't have any proof, and now I've convinced myself that I saw his car drive past tonight. Maybe I'm going crazy." Joy responded by staying on the phone with her, offered to come sit with her or contact the police. But Karen thanked her for her concern, but concluded that it was probably nothing and she felt better just talking with someone. Okay? You with me? So I might bring something like this, a concern. Joy would probably bring it up in a meeting and say, "Hey, you guys all know Karen. We've been praying for her. We've been ministering to her. This is what happened last night. Is there anything else, team, that we can do for Karen without placing her in danger or increasing the threat on her? Does anybody have any suggestions? What can we do to help Karen without putting her in danger? Is there anything going on here?" It could be in anybody. Everybody's got something to share. Right. 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 Yeah. Excellent handoff. I love it. Excellent. Uh-huh. So, anybody learn anything so far? No. Now, listen. This is exactly why a team is really beneficial to us. I knew going in, I was assuming North Carolina was very similar to West Virginia, that a suspicion of fear is not the same as a threat of fear, that without the proof behind it, that civil order was going to be really hard to get. So it's funny because counselors probably don't think this way, but having law enforcement around the table and attorneys around the table, their mind, I mean, you can honestly see with Diana, right? You can honestly see she's gone through this type of scenario before. Having her at the table is tremendously beneficial to me as a pastor because I never would have thought of deer cameras. So it's very, very powerful, I hope. So anything else from that standpoint that somebody would like to add?
I would like to add also, I think it would be a good idea also to change the locks on the doors. The locks on the windows, whatever you have to do, and also you can put an alarm on your window. You can have cameras in your house. If someone comes in, you have a camera on, and so you have some evidence.
So we're told in the scripture that it's by 2 or more witnesses. Sometimes we get caught in the pastoral world that we require proof. Documentation is an essential second witness for those of us who are maybe unsure. So when law enforcement encourages to document and when a survivor encourages us to change the locks, we need to take those suggestions seriously, correct? Because from Carolyn's perspective as a survivor, she brings a whole new weight to our group where I might not even think, well, my mind, unfortunately, might go, well, she's imagining things. We need to meet her mental health care. We need to talk to Omar or something, or we need to have somebody go pray with her, have Jim go over there, right? Whereas Carolyn's going to be able to step up and say, you know what? No, it's a good idea to change the locks. And then that's another area where we can involve Jim, can't we? Hey, anybody in the church know how to do that? Well, yeah, we'll take care of it this afternoon. And we can start meeting those immediate needs. All right, guys, I think with resources, we covered some of the limitations that we have governmentally, but are there any other resources that may be available to Karen that we just want to throw out on the table that Joy might be able to take back to her from our perspective? I mean, we got these suggestions, but anything else on the table you want to suggest?
One of the newer, it's not a newer program, it's just new to me, one I wasn't aware of, is this address confidentiality program. So if you've been involved in domestic violence and then you move, you can get put on this program where on your license and everything has this fake address basically, but you still get all your stuff. All your mail goes to that fake address, and then it's securely forwarded to your real address. I think that's a really important program for people, especially who are fleeing from an abuser. And then I think most people know about Interact, which is a main domestic violence resource here in Raleigh in Wake County, who they can provide all different types of services, emergency shelter, it's counseling. We now do the initial domestic violence restraining orders there at Interact through a video teleconference, which kind of helps take away that fear of being in front of a courtroom full of people. It's done more privately, with just you and the judge. So I think those are all important resources to let them know about.
Good.
As far as I know, we're the only ones that are doing it so far, the video conference.
Interact, I think, deals exclusively with folks in Wake County, a lot of folks. But a similar organization is Safe Space. They're based in Franklin County, but they deal with Franklin, Granville County. They'll also take some folks from Wake County if they feel like they can't get to downtown Raleigh. Then there's a group in Vance County in Henderson, and I forget what they're called.
Families Living Violence Free is
Karen Branch is the director of the entity in Vance County. So there are programs in the area that take care of victims.
And since I hadn't said anything, one thing, to find out is what is behind all that. So we would sit down and talk and look at really what led up to this. You have to know the history. So,
Yep.
Because as I said earlier, a lot of times, so many of the women that come to us are making excuses for him. Well, he didn't mean to do it. So there's so many excuses going on that you have to educate them, show them that power and control wheel or whatever it may be, so that they can start getting a clearer picture, and you can get a clearer picture as far as, is this really abusive, and just, again, background history is really important.
Yep. Good.
From a pastor's perspective, I'm just thinking of how can our church minister to this person at this time. So you might not think of it as a resource, but friendship. And maybe she doesn't want to tell you that, maybe she wants to tell you that talking on the phone was enough. She doesn't want to inconvenience you, perhaps, or something like that. So maybe I would think along those lines of how we could actually, as a pastor, I wouldn't go there just with a woman, but calling on a church member who she was friends with, maybe.
Good observation. That would be something we would want to come up in a roundtable discussion, because we want to connect her physical safety, her emotional well-being, and her spiritual well-being all in the same conversation, because she is a whole person, correct? I mean, Karen's not a bifurcated person. She is all of those things, and we want the resources to avail that. On the next note, guys, Karen is anxious, I think, and we don't know all the answers to the anxiety here, but how do we best care for her heart in this? Is there something that we can do as a team? Certainly, pastor's right, we want to be a friend, but is there anything we can offer or ways to serve her as far as her anxiety and her heart goes? Do we have a responsibility to that?
Anybody want to take that?
See, this is why you have an advocate as the point person. To choose who's going to talk.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about was, and again, this is maybe in terms of her anxiety, this is more of a practical step as far as what you, tell me your name again, I'm sorry, Jim. Pastor Jim was saying about our roles as pastor and family and friends, is that Karen was saying that he agreed to not, to give I think, and the children some space. Now, if that was just sort of a verbal agreement, but it was, let's say, made in the context of with other pastors and with other friends and a network of support where they all can attest to that fact, then I think that those persons are in an appropriate position to be able to, instead of Karen making the phone call to try and confront or address the suspicion or her anxiety with her husband, I think that they would be appropriate to give him a call to say, hey, you said that you were going to do this. Were you in the house? What happened? Tell us the truth. And they would be the people to have that conversation with him versus her, because much of her anxiety probably stems from the fact that she feels like she has to get directly involved in it, but that may not be necessary.
Yeah, so let's assume, for the sake of the discussion, that we have managed this case in the past, that Joy's bringing us an update, so that we as a team were engaged in that agreement, right? For much the same reason that we've been told we didn't have enough legally to go after the courts to help us with that, we all agreed that was best, and he agreed to it. So we do have that in writing. That's something that we've come up with. So Omar brings up a really good point at this point. What role then do we have in talking with her husband, and are we free to do so, and are there any dangers in that, or any precautions that we need to take in that? And I know I'm the battery intervention guy on the stage, but I'd much rather y'all answer it. I would say that I'm with Omar. I think there needs to be a conversation. I am of the opinion that I don't necessarily have to disclose why I'm having that conversation with him, and I'm going to probably have multiple conversations. In other words, I want to just talk to him about how things are going, and in the process of communicating, I'm maybe, how are you doing with the arrangement not being at the house? And just because I don't want to, maybe you guys agree or disagree, I don't really want him to know that I have information from Karen that's going to put her in any type of harm's way or anything. But I do kind of want to know what he's thinking about the arrangement. And he might not tell me that he's broken our arrangement, but he might tell me how unfair he thinks it is, and that'll really let me see some of his heart, which will give me better questions to ask, right? Because if he's like, well, I'm staying away, but this is stupid. Like, how long is this going to last? Well, that's going to then invite me to ask a few more questions. Well, I know that you're frustrated. What might be some temptations that you've had? Have you been tempted to break the order? Like, if I were to go to the neighbor's house, would they have seen your truck there? Like, I'm really concerned about you because you're so passionate. And what I haven't done is I haven't outed Karen, hopefully. Make sense? Like, is that fair enough, guys? Yeah?
I will say, and I have the easier job up here because I get to go back to the statutes.
Yeah.
But from a legal standpoint, once folks who've been in a relationship have separated, and one of the parties has said, do not come back to the property, if they go back after a period of time, I'm not sure what that means, but if they go back to the premises after a period of time, it's what we call domestic criminal trespass.
Oh, very
you
good.
don't have to have domestic violence then, it's domestic criminal trespass. Now, yeah, because they're separated. Now,
Yeah.
without a restraining order. Now, I'd like to hear from these folks whether or not they find that that's enforceable when they get called.
That was my next question. I was going to say, can you actually enforce that? There's a big difference between the code and actually what gets done, isn't it?
This is obviously most easily enforceable when there is some type of an order. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that restraining order. When you are arrested for a domestic-related assault or charge, you 99% of the time are giving what's called a no-contact order.
Right.
And the judge, when he sets your conditions of release, sets your bond, he tells you, you are not allowed to return to this residence without law enforcement. You can return one time to gather your clothing and tools of your trade and those things. But other than that, you can't go back. So that is the most easiest time for us to enforce it. It is enforceable, and they do leave it vague after a period of time. It really just depends, it's totality of the circumstances. It depends on what officer you get, how well he's aware of the law. It depends on the magistrate. Some magistrates look at us like we're crazy, and some know the law very well and are very open to that charge. So it's really, there's no easy answer to that question.
So church leaders, a couple things to really think through. If you're building a coalition like this, obviously this information is tremendously helpful, but some questions you may want to ask back to those who are informed on the law and then those who are in law enforcement are things such as knowing the distinction between a no contact order and no unlawful contact, or understanding your role as a pastor with a no contact order in place when you have worship services on Sunday. If you have a singular service, if both parties are free to do that. I have actually had magistrates who have made the no contact except for church, which I thought was ridiculous. And then I have had cases where they've had no contact and they've had the church had multiple services. So they attended different services and elders were assigned to each person, or a caregiver was assigned. So being able to wrestle through that with law enforcement and attorneys is essential, because you don't need to know the law. It's okay. Like, that's not your primary goal. Your primary goal is for spiritual development. But you got to do that in congruence with the law. That's why Romans 13 is in the Bible, right? So really, really value that type of input. Joy, you had something to add? I mean, of course you have something to add.
I just wanted to talk about the criminal trespassing. I got charged with that. Okay, I had been separated from my ex, and he was threatening suicide again and again and again, and he had been badgering me, like calling about 100 times a day, and all of a sudden the calls stopped, and I thought, man, I hope he's okay. Like 3 days went by, and I would drive by from a distance and see his car in the driveway, so I thought, I was going to go check. So I took my key to our house. I think I'd been out the significant amount of time was like maybe a month. And I walked upstairs, and he was in the bed, and he just looked like he was dead. He was just deadly still. And I said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And he just woke up and said, "What the hell are you doing in my house?" And I ran out.
Yes. And that was on Facebook Live, right? Yeah.
Excuse me. But anyway, so I went home and I was like, oh, it scared me because I was so
Yeah.
afraid of him. And he went down to the magistrate and got an order for my arrest. And I was arrested for criminal trespassing. But this is in another state. But, I mean, so they did enforce it. And it just blew my mind. Now, they let me out on my own recognizance, but I couldn't believe it. And yet, I couldn't get them to come when I called them because they knew he had guns. Like, this was a small community, and they asked me, does he have guns? And they just wouldn't come when I called 911.
So, are you understanding the concept of why something like this might be a valuable conversation to have? All right, let's switch cases because I want to share something else with you. I chose Karen's case because I figured if we had law enforcement and folks from the legal side on the panel, we'd be able to get some dialogue going. I want to switch gears a little bit because this is a more unique case that I think is very valuable for a response team to cover. This is going to be in the form of a letter or a note, maybe an email. Dear Pastor Kevin, we could say Pastor Jim because he's on the panel. I wanted to write you this note to give you a brief update and to thank you once again for your care and support during our recent separation. Well, I never would have imagined calling the police last year was the best decision I ever made. Everything has changed. We are a family again, and while we do still argue occasionally, we are both doing better at remaining calm. There have been a few times when I felt tempted to leave, but I'm sure that I'm just overreacting. Things are so different. The children and I are free to speak, and he's not touched me, not even once. Well, anyway, I just wanted to give you a chance to rejoice with us and give you an update. God bless, Janet. Now, the note I wrote to the team was, I'm bringing this to you guys because some of the team worked on this case. I'm assuming that we've known this couple for a while, and I have some concerns about ongoing support. Once a resolution seems to be accomplished, that doesn't mean that our role as caregivers and support personnel ends. So my question to the team is, I have my concerns, but I would like to hear from the little bit of information we have, what concerns might you have? Omar's got a concern. Somebody toss that microphone down there.
So one of the first things that I thought was, and I'll just sort of read it because I had an opportunity just to write it. I hope that's okay with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that first we want to celebrate with her the small victory, probably large for her, maybe small for us, while continuing to encourage increased marital health. So we don't want to take the wind out of her sail, but we also don't want her to have sort of a false hope that doesn't sort of accurately interpret what's kind of really happening there. I think it's important to remember that in this case, while her husband may not necessarily be hitting her, it doesn't mean that he's healthy. So elimination, as you all know, for physical violence doesn't mean that means he's healthy, or that there aren't other forms of abuse that are going on too. So I think it would be helpful, although he hasn't touched her or the kids inappropriately, how has he been talking to her? Does he still try to control or manipulate her? What are the preceding steps that he usually takes before violence actually escalates? Has he stopped those things as well? And then the last thing that I would say is, does she know what kind of an impact her having called the police actually had on him? So like in terms of his motives and his intentions. So was it truly a wake-up call for him, where he's like repented and he's acknowledged his not just his actions but the underlying motives and attitudes and beliefs? Or does he believe that he was actually wrong, or does he just feel like he needs to adjust his behavior so as not to get the same outcomes, right? So his wife's compliance and his control, so without the same consequences, he doesn't have to deal with the civil authorities. So what has he actually said about why he's made the changes that he's made?
Okay. So let's start with the concept of not taking the wind out of her sails. I really want to highlight how awesome that comment was, because I think the way the note is structured, some of us who've been in the work for a while, our gut reaction is probably, uh-oh, right? But this is still her husband, this is still her family, this is still her life. And good advocacy knows that the victim directs our steps. We don't direct theirs. They've already had a controlling person. They don't need two, right? So for Omar to come out and say, we want to celebrate the small things while remaining cautious, is super helpful. And then I would suggest, in order to uncover his motives, we'll probably need to have a discussion at some point about how is he receiving care. And what does his care look like?
And who's holding him accountable?
Yeah,
and
who's
I
holding him
think that
accountable.
would be, the church would have a huge role in that, I think. And then as an advocate, somebody needs to stay in touch with her just to, walk alongside and to listen and be a sounding board so that we can start recognizing any red flags that might pop up.
Yeah, any other thoughts?
Well, when I read that this morning, I just printed that out this morning, okay?
You're fine.
But when I read that this morning, it kind of made me really think about my own situation. I mean, it's been 19 years since my husband shot me, and I have not seen him in that time. But my daughter, she's 33, and she talks to him maybe twice a year. She says she can't do it any more than that because he's kind of. So she told me that every time when she does decide to pick up the phone to call him to see how he's doing, within 2 minutes of the conversation, my name is brought up. And so when she told me that, what I remember is when he went to prison, he wrote a letter to me saying, no matter how long it takes, I'm going to finish the job. Okay? So when my daughter told me recently, only about a month ago, that she had called him to wish him a happy birthday, and 2 minutes into the conversation, he started asking about me and telling her, how much he still loved me. And I'm like, God knows, don't love me. Please don't love me. I don't want your love. And so, but it makes me stay on my toes, because even though I feel that it's been that many years, I'm still not going to let my guard down.
Right.
And this morning, Joy was talking about trauma. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, I was in PetSmart, and you talking about trauma. I was standing there, and what is those dogs, those great big dogs? You know what I'm talking about? No, Great Dane. So I'm standing at the register, and out of all the people in PetSmart, I don't like for nobody to come up behind me, okay, because that's what my ex did. This dog found me, came up behind me, and all I felt was I thought hands on my shoulders, okay? And I had a meltdown in PetSmart. I mean, I was screaming to the top of my lungs, okay? And I scared that poor dog to death. I did. And I had to apologize. And the owner was like, oh my God, man, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But I explained to him after I calmed down why I reacted the way I did. Because, like I said, I don't trust my ex. I don't care how many years it is or how many years it has been. I am on my guard at all times. And so listening to that story, I just, recommend that no matter what, I don't care how rosy the situation look, you still need to be on your guard.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So we got a voice of reason at the table, and having her voice kind of balances out what we were just talking about. It's really, really good. And that's the type of discussion that we want to have around the table. Absolutely.
And as a pastor, I'm right on board with you as far as I'm not an entertainer. I'm not a celebrity pastor. Really, I'm a shepherd, an under-shepherd. And so just because she concludes with things are now rosy doesn't end our shepherding over her and her family. And so we'll continue to just have normal follow-up, looking after their spiritual care, their family relationships, things like that. And her email to me lacked a lot of detail. It was very vague. So I would want to ask a lot of questions like, what do these arguments look like?
Yep.
What were the instances in which you felt tempted to leave? Why is that? What do you mean when you say you were overreacting? You
Yep.
think you might just be overreacting. And to what does she attribute the change in the man? Those sorts of questions, kind of prying a little more deeply into that.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was fishing for in the vagueness, was those what-based questions, the arguing occasionally, and then I think the tempted to leave is a tremendous conversation that we need to have, understanding what that looks like.
Well, and the reality, and based on the statistics, are that your typical victim leaves or tries to leave, what is it, Joy, 8 times, 9 times?
7 to 12, something like that.
And the last time they leave is the most dangerous for them. I've represented folks who have, victims who have showed up in January saying they want a restraining order, and we get one for them, and 2 months later, without my assistance, they're in court saying, I want to withdraw this. Our judges have gotten pretty good, I think, in the counties that I practice in, Wake, et cetera, about questioning them about why you want to dismiss this, but if the victim wants to do it, they're ultimately going to do it. 6 months later, they're there saying, I need a restraining order. I've had folks come to the organizations I've worked with on numerous occasions with the request to have orders. It's tough. And again, it's tough to leave financially, et cetera, emotionally. They got kids, et cetera. So
I've found too, in working with law enforcement, and I've been encouraging you this weekend to contact law enforcement. Having a family violence unit, intervention unit like we're dealing with here is exceptional, and having our domestic violence officer at the table is exceptional because they're well equipped in the dynamics and impact. But the police officer on the street, and maybe the officers can share this, there is a wear and tear on making the same call to the same house in the same situation over and over and over again. And for an attorney who feels like they've served well and then to be undermined, or an advocate who doesn't hear from a client in forever, or a pastor who doesn't see the family, right? We can be tempted to give up. But I was actually talking to a police officer not too long ago who was really sharing that with me, and he had just done an intervention and it was successful. He had removed someone from the home, and he was telling me, I've gone there so many times, I was just getting tired. And I think my words were, well, that night you may have saved a life. Like, is it worth being tired knowing that, that night you may have saved someone's life? And it is frustrating, but it's also redemptive, is it not? I mean, Jesus didn't give up on us, right, time and time and time again. I would think that's the case, right? Did I get that right, Pastor? I feel like he's been pursuing us pretty hard. So I think we should continue pursuing as well. Omar, you got something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick point to piggyback off of what Pastor Jim and you, Chris, were saying in terms of when she highlighted that there were times where she was tempted to leave. One of the things that I see over and over and over again is maybe for her, anything short of physical violence, she writes off as her sort of anxiety. And one of the things that I see a lot with victims is their inability to trust their own reality testing and their own judgments and their own perceptions. And so we want to encourage them that what they see and hear and experience is real.
Hey, can y'all just imagine, I really want to take this last 5 minutes. Can you imagine your pastor sitting around a table having this conversation and hearing that advice? Could it be transformative? I think so. I think it could be very transformative. Now, don't get me wrong. I think, and pardon me to law enforcement, I think law enforcement could benefit from us. Maybe I'm a little arrogant. But I also think, and I know that we could benefit from them. As you look at the case and think about where we're at, guys, and our concerns, so we have concerns, what steps can or should we take now? Like, what's our next steps? Is there anything that we can do or advice we can give to Joy? I mean, what's our next steps here? Anybody? Bueller? Is this thing on?
I'm a female. I always have something to say. That's correct. I am always right.
Stuart Little can be taught.
It's taken me 27 years, but we're getting there. I agree with everything that's been said so far. It is important that we continue that support with her, and do realize that it's not over, and she needs to be self-aware of everything and realize that just because it's not physical violence, he still very likely is manipulating her, controlling her in some way. If, in my personal opinion, if a married couple can't go to a function and work the room both together and individually, there's something wrong there. You should be confident enough in your relationship that you can be together and you can be apart in public just the same. So I think that's something to look out for when you're dealing with them. Kind of watch their mannerisms and see how they're reacting to each other. See if he lets her leave his side. See the way she looks when he puts his arm around her. Things of that nature. Then in our particular department, we practice where once I get a couple, I get all of their future cases as long as I'm still there in the unit. And that way I kind of build a rapport with them, because like we said, they leave 5, 6, 7, 12 times before they'll ever finally leave. And that kind of helps me build a rapport with this couple, and we can talk to them over time. And I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I thought you left him last month. What's going on? Can you tell me why you chose to go back? And we can start to get a feel for where their head's at. And we also work very closely with crisis counselors and victim advocates who we put them in touch with. And those people try their best, even after the case is technically closed, to follow up with them on some sort of basis, some sort of periodic basis. It's very hard, obviously, because there's only so many of us, and the cases don't quit coming in. But we do try to keep up with them, and I think that's very important to do.
Yeah, the point of including this particular case is that our interventions and our care doesn't end. There is a support aspect to it. And so that's the last question I have for the team. What role, if any, does a response team like ours have after an apparent resolution, such as a divorce, a reconciliation, or even hiding things under the rug, as could be the case? What role do we continue to have with a couple like this, or any couple, after a resolution's been achieved or seemingly achieved?
Well, as I mentioned in my talk this morning, a lot of times victims remain victims because they never heal. They don't move past the traumas that they've been through. So definitely we want to offer them support and help walk them through that healing process. Now, if it's after a reconciliation, we have lots of women in our support group who are still with their abusers. And as much as I want to go in there and go, come out, we do. We leave it to them. It's advocacy 101.
101, yeah.
And I actually got certified with the North Carolina Coalition. And the one thing they tell us is you've got to leave it up to them. But you can be a friend, you can be a support without going in there and trying to steer and force and try to tell them where to go, or what to do. You need to provide them with options, always provide them with options. Like, if this were to continue, then I would suggest. And, they really question their reasoning, because we talked about that too. It's almost like a brainwashing that goes on. When abuse occurs, it changes the way they think. So you have to help them clear that fog by education and healing, go through the healing aspect as well.
So we often say we offer the victim options, just like Joyce said, and we manage the offender's programming. Meaning, in their relationship, the offender typically has been in control. Part of our responsibility as a care team is we allow the victim to have control over their own choices. We empower them to do so, right? But at the same time, we manage the offender. So my friend Chris puts it this way. He says, just like God, we comfort the afflicted and we afflict the comfortable. So there's a case or a piece for both of them in that process, helping to achieve a resolution that way. Any other thoughts, team? You did a pretty good job.
And also, I would suggest, I missed down here, when you're coming out of a domestic violence situation, relationship, marriage, I would suggest, if seeking therapy, and at the same time, take time out to learn who God has created you to be. That is the main thing. Sometimes I've been mentoring women for about 15 and a half years, and one of the things that really bothers me is when I see someone come out of a bad relationship and just go right back into another one, okay? And they don't take time to really learn about themselves and learn who God created them to be. And one of the books that I have read that I recommend to some of the ladies that I mentor was written by, I can't think of his name, that came right to the end of my tongue, Miles Monroe. And it's called The Purpose of a Woman. And then another book that is entwined to that book is The Purpose of a Man. And reading those two books, it really opens up your eyes, and it teaches you biblically, and it takes you to scriptures in the Bible that teaches you why you are here, what your purpose here is on earth, okay? And it is just so rewarding, and it just opens you up and just makes you feel like a much stronger person. Once you know why you're here on this earth, a lot of people don't know why they're here, okay? They really don't. I mean, people are always searching, and there are some churches that say, pray and ask God what your purpose is, okay? But our purpose here on earth is to serve the kingdom of God.
Yep.
And so when you realize that and you focus your life on that, and you learn who you are in God, it will make a tremendous difference, and it will bring you out of that valley. That is what kept me from staying in that valley, because I knew that God did not save my life for me to sit around and be sad, okay? I mean, really. And so, if you do that, that would just help you out so much.
Awesome. Monroe, Miles Monroe. Yeah, I can't say it the I vowels. It's an Appalachian thing, so my apologies. We are God's workmanship, right? Created in Christ Jesus to do good works that he prepared in advance for us to do. It's not like our purpose is beyond good deeds. We should be holding people who do wicked things accountable to do good things, and we should be encouraging those who've been oppressed to live a life that's full and abundant, just the way Jesus promises. Well, we should go on the road. All right, well, let's thank our panel. I think they did a great job.